All right, so we'll go on to this Q&A. Again, we'll run to this Q&A. So a couple of questions came in. One, one has to do, if I find it here. One has to do with the Hebrew language, and the question was, or let's say the question is, there are a number of questions here. One is that we know that every letter in the Hebrew language corresponds to a number, right? We call it gematria, right? Aleph is 1, Beis is 2, Gimel is 3, right? We call that gematria. So basically the question is, if the Hebrew language's numbers correspond to each letter, right? That is definitely true. Yeah, is it then possible, mathematically, it would be a sin to speak any other language? Yeah, because Hebrew is a perfect language, no possibility to curse. That is, whatever. That's one question. We'll do a follow-up question in a little bit. So, very true. The Hebrew language, what do you call it? There is gematria, right? Every letter corresponds to a number, as we said before. And people like to say interesting, gematrias that, doesn't, if a person doesn't think they're so good, doesn't make you, definitely doesn't make you a heretic. On the other hand, if you believe in all of them or whatever, doesn't necessarily make you righteous either. But we'll give an example. On Purim. On Purim, there's a mitzvah to know or not know the difference between Baruch Mordechai and Arohama, right? Blessed be Mordechai and cursed be Hama. Now, the mitzvah on Purim is to drink. Well, really not the topic here, but there's a mitzvah not to know the difference. So if you drink enough, you won't know the difference, right? Or you drink, let's say, a little bit, you drink more than you normally would. Yeah. I mean, there is a mitzvah to get drunk, but I'm saying you drink a little bit more, so you don't know the difference. Person goes to sleep, right? At some point. You also won't know the difference. But anyway, what's the point? The point is the numerical value. If you do the numerical value of Baruch Mordechai, all the letters of Baruch Mordechai, and the numerical value of Ara Haman, cursed be Haman, they're both the same. The numerical value is the same. Right? Now, if a person, has had enough to drink, it's going to be very hard to do that equation. Yeah. In other words, you got to think about it, right? Bays is 2, right? Reish is 200, Vav is 6, right? Chaf is 20. So that's where you get Baruch, right? Then you have Mordechai's Mem is 40, right? And Reish is 200, whatever. You figure out, you figure out the numerical value, right? You add it up and it comes out the same, right? But if you drink enough, you won't be able to do it, right? You don't have to be plastered, but if a person had a few drinks, you're not necessarily thinking so straight, it's going to be a hard calculation. Yeah, so there are calculations. There are calculations that are significant. I'm not going to say that they are not significant. Again, are these calculations, enough to make someone religious? I wouldn't necessarily say that. I mean, they're interesting. They are definitely interesting. They can have deeper meaning as well, but okay. Now, based on that, the question is, would it be a sin to speak any other language? Now, yeah, so the issue is that even here in Israel, they speak Hebrew, but they don't speak what we call olashon hakodesh, right? Biblical Hebrew, right? More holy tongue, no question. So in Hebrew itself, again, not in we're going to call lashon hakodesh. In Hebrew itself, they're curse words. There are people who curse, for better or for worse, or probably for worse. Yeah, there are people that curse. Okay. Could a person, here in Israel or anywhere, if they know Hebrew, could they curse in Hebrew? Forbidden. Right? Forbidden to really curse in any language. We're not saying that using God's name to curse. Well, curse. Right? Whatever a curse word is. Now, that being said, Hebrew can be used for, speaking lashon hara, for saying, for cursing, for other things, right? Obviously bad, right? Even if you tell me lashon hakodesh, even if you tell me, people speak lashon kodesh, so you say there are no swear words in lashon kodesh. Okay, that may be true, but could I use lashon kodesh or Hebrew? Could I use them to say lashon hara, to speak badly against someone else? Could I use it to say rechilas, a tattletale, right? Right? It's also a form of lashon hara. It's also a form of speaking badly against someone else. But really, it means you're tattletaling. Reuven, do you hear what Shimon said about you? That's forbidden, right? That's what it means. Don't be a talebearer among your people. Yeah. Could I speak in Hebrew? Not me, somebody. Could somebody speak in Hebrew and transgress the Torah prohibition of being a tattletale? Sure. Could a person be over more than 30 prohibitions, transgress 30 prohibitions by speaking lashon hara in the Hebrew language? In lashon hakodesh? Yes, they could. Yeah. So even if you're going to tell me, which is true, even if you're going to say there are no curse words, very good, it's a pure language, okay. Could I use the language to do bad things? Sure. Like any other language, why not? I can speak lashon hara in French, German, Spanish, Swahili, English, Hebrew, lashon hakodesh. What's the difference, right? If you're gonna tell me it's the perfect language, you're right. You're right. On the one hand, you're not speaking. You're not. No curse words. Okay. Even if that would be true, there are other things. Could a person speak lashon hara use that language? Yeah, you could. I'm not saying you should. Right, 100% you could. Right now, that since Hebrew has been used and vernacularized today, right? It's one of the things, coming back to the land of Israel, they wanted to bring back the Hebrew language. Okay, that's not a holy language per se. Talk lashon hakodesh. Yeah, and you hear people on the street, God forbid what they say. Yeah, speaking Hebrew, and cursing people out in Hebrew and other things. That's bad. That 100% is bad. Yeah, so that's why some people will only speak Yiddish. Yiddish is a more holy language than Hebrew. Yeah, so they'll speak Yiddish instead. Obviously, they probably know Hebrew, but if they have to use it, they will. But Yiddish is a better language, right? It's a more holy. It's a more holy language. Okay. Even that being said, yeah. So the question is, right? In other words, if you have gematria, in other words, you have a number corresponds to every letter, right? Again, Aleph is 1, Beis is 2, Gimel is 3, right? Then it's possible, right? If again you have this mathematical numbers and whatever, then it would be a sin to speak another language. Some would say, yeah. Some would definitely say it's better to speak, it's better to speak in the holy tongue, right? Better to speak in Hebrew or really better to speak in lashon kodesh. Okay. What if you don't know lashon kodesh? What if you never learned it? Yeah. Can you speak in any other language? You could. Not forbidden, right? Not necessarily forbidden. But you tell me it's not a holy language. Good. Yeah. You have a choice? If you have a choice, yeah, is it better to speak the holy language? Yes. If you had a choice, for sure. Yeah. And what if you don't? What if you don't? You transgress not using the language? No. You don't transgress. right? You definitely don't transgress, right? Is it better, to speak in a more holy language? Sure, right? That I would agree. That I would agree. So the question is, okay, if it's more perfect language, the better language, let's say, right? You have no ability to curse. You're right. You're right. Let's say there's no curse word. Okay. But you could use the language to speak olashon. You could use the language to be a tattletale, to be a talebearer. Yeah. So even though it's holy and it doesn't have, let's say, curse words, that's a benefit. That's definitely a benefit. But I could misuse the language and speak badly against others with it. So, in that sense, it's no different than any other language. Yeah. There's a benefit, right? So you don't have specific curse words in olashon hakodesh. In Hebrew, you do, right? Not the same, right? They're not the same language. Yeah, but in Hebrew, you do, right? Seemingly in Yiddish, you do also. Yeah, what a lot of interesting things. when I sat in the rabbinical court of my Rebbe in the Haredis in Jerusalem. Yeah, many years ago. He once asked me, my Rebbe once asked me, before I went to South America, he asked me, he goes, "What did you enjoy the most? What did you enjoy the most about sitting there?" I sat there once a week with him for 5 years. I could tell stories till tomorrow. But what I saw there, what people talked about, some of the cases came in, but we're not going to do that. But he asked me, what did I enjoy the most? Now he's probably saying, look at all the righteous people I met, the experience, whatever, right? I don't know exactly what he was expecting, but I'll tell you what my answer was. My answer was, my answer was that I learned, he said, what did you enjoy most? I said, I learned how to curse in Yiddish. He's like, what? I was like, no, that was just a perk. I was like, that was just a benefit. I said this over again. I was with him going somewhere, and a bunch of his grandkids were there, so they were talking back and forth in Yiddish. So I was answering whatever, I was answering his grandkids, and they're like, "Where'd you learn Yiddish?" So like, "How do you know Yiddish?" So I said, I sat with the grandfather in the basement, in the rabbinical court. So I picked up some Yiddish, along the way. And so then I said, yeah. I said, you share all the curse words I learned. They all started learning. They all started laughing. So my Rebbe looked around. He all said, like, quarter response. I said, listen, it was only a perk. I said, that wasn't the best part. That was, it was a perk. Yeah. So you can have curse words in Yiddish also, right? Maybe in olashon hakodesh you don't have. Olashon hakodesh you don't have. Okay. Yeah. But Yiddish is also a holy language. Many people, there are Hasidim, not most of the people, but many Hasidim will only speak in Yiddish. I get it that they go somewhere else, they have to speak in Hebrew, okay. Yeah, but their mother tongue will be Yiddish. I mean, that's my Rebbe's mother tongue, even though he grew up in England. His mother tongue is Yiddish. Yeah, I think English is better than his Hebrew. Yeah, but still, I would say his mother tongue is English also, understands English very well also, but I would say Yiddish comes first, English probably comes second, Hebrew is third, right? And probably in that order. So in Yiddish I can also curse. I mean, I'm not saying I would, I'm not saying I would, but there are words in Yiddish, so Yiddish is also a holy language. Yeah. But even if you're right, even if it's true in olashon hakodesh, there's no curses. There are no curse words. Okay, that's a huge benefit. But again, any language, as holy as it is, could be manipulated and spoken, and spoken in ways that you're not allowed. So, on the one hand, is it better to speak in a holy language? Yes. Could a person abuse it and say bad things? Maybe not curse, but speak olashon hara, which is probably worse than cursing in different ways, unless you curse with God's name. Right? Why do I say it's worse? Say it's worse because more than 30 prohibitions in one shot. If you curse somebody, right, you curse someone out, use curse words, whatever, it's only one prohibition. Could be a few other prohibitions. Could be a handful of prohibitions. Yeah, it's not 30, not even close. Right? So definitely speaking olashon hara is worse. So that answers the second part of the question. Third part of the question is the Hebrew language then used mathematically. Yeah, okay, let's say use it for gematria. Yeah, you'd find no impurities. I don't know if you'd find no impurities. The point is I could use numerical value of numbers, right? Sorry, of letters. And I could come up with terrible things if I wanted to. If I looked for it, right? I'm not saying you should. Yeah. But if a person wanted to, right? Could they find impurities? Could they make a statement and say this means this and this means that and make it a negative statement? They could. Why not? I mean, if it's mathematically impossible, good. Right? Then you have a point. Well, let's say it's not. Let's say it's not mathematically impossible. Let's say a person wanted to curse someone using gematria. Could they do it? If mathematically it works out, then it works out. Right? If you find impurities of the question is moot, right? But if you're going to say, let's say, right? So, I'm in a generous mood now. Let's say you don't find any impurities in the language. There are no impurities. Okay. You have no impurities. In other languages, they have slander. But again, I just knocked that out because you could speak slander in Hebrew, in Hebrew or olashon hakodesh or whatever, right? You could speak slander. It's not stopping you. What's stopping Reuben to speak against Shimon, in the holy language? Nothing. Nothing. Cursing, yeah, maybe you can't curse because you don't have any words to say it. Yeah. Maybe you can say a whole bunch of words to say the same thing. Maybe. Yeah. So that's probably not true. Right? But again, even if, let's say, even if you would find, we'll go to third question here. Even if you would find no impurities, where all other languages have slander. Again, I don't think it's true, but which would then mathematically would be impurity, would be an impurity, or negligent calculation where Hebrew doesn't have such. In theory, yeah. In other words, if you would use gematria to curse someone out, yeah, or sorry, use other languages to curse someone out. In Hebrew, you can't do that. Let's say, right? Doesn't have any curse words. Okay, right? So that's true, right? That would be true. But that doesn't mean I can't speak slander using Hebrew. I could, or using the holy, using olashon hakodesh. I could. That's not a possibility. That why can't a person speak slander using the word? It's not a problem, right? I mean, it's not a good thing to do, obviously. Transgress many prohibitions. Yeah. So now the question is, okay. So Hebrew, let's say you can't do that. Okay. Yeah. So all the languages have slander. Very good. So then automatically it would be an impurity. I don't know. I'm not so sure I would say that. Because you're right. If you have the ability to slander in any language, we're looking at any language as being second, playing second fiddle to Hebrew or to olashon hakodesh. That's true. All the other languages are treif languages. They're not kosher languages, but you speak it, you speak it. Yeah? Better to speak in Hebrew or better to speak in olashon hakodesh. That's for sure. That 100% is for sure. If you don't, you don't. Right? If you don't know it, you never learned it. Okay. Right? But again, someone growing up Hasidus, they will teach their kids and only speak in Yiddish. Because it's a holier language. It's holier language than English, French, German, all together. Yeah, you put all the languages together, Yiddish still holier. Right? Hebrew, holier than that. Okay. Yeah. So again, if what you're saying is true, if what the statement is true, all other languages have slander, curse words, whatever, okay, then the language itself would be an impurity. Yes, that is true. Because we look at any language outside of Yiddish, Russian, Kodesh, or Hebrew, right? If it's spoken right, we look at those as the most holy language. Nothing to talk about. Every other language considered a treif language. I'll give an example. I sat in the Beis Din, like I said before, once a week for 5 years. Now, one of the rabbis that came in, was one of the Torah giants of the last generation. Rav Moshe Halberstam, blessed memory. And he came in, I don't know, he came at the end. He didn't normally sit on that day with my Rebbe, but nonetheless, I mean, he knew me because he used to see me all the time with him, with my Rebbe. So he came at the end to fill in for somebody, and the case came in English. So my Rebbe told me, he said, listen, I'm going to explain, to the other rabbis here what they're talking about in English, and you explain to Rabbi Halberstam. You explain to him in English. This is like they weren't hearing the whole case. They're just hearing like the basic points of the case. It's like it was at the very end. It's like the very end of all the cases. So they weren't going to spend that much time on it. Anyway, so something came in. There was a document there. So I was translating, telling them what it means, and and then that was it. Then they left. We were gonna, we were waiting around to pray, whatever. So I asked Rav Halberstam the following question. I asked him, I said, Mashiach comes, Mirz Hashem, God's help, Messiah's going to come. The Rav will be on the Sanhedrin, right? Bring back the Sanhedrin. The Rav will be back on the Sanhedrin. I said, what's going to be that people in the Sanhedrin knew 70 languages? Yeah, that's one of the reasons that Mordechai was able to thwart a plot to kill the king, because there were two people speaking that were going to plot against the king. He was sitting by the gates, and he understood their language. So he was able to tell them, he was able to tell Esther to tell the king, and they verified the story. And that's how he got written in the Book of Chronicles. That's how he got written in the Book of Chronicles, because he understood their language. Right? He understood 70 languages, because he was on the Sanhedrin. So I asked Rabbi Halberstam, I said, what's going to be? I said, Messiah is going to come. Messiah is going to come. You're going to be put on the Sanhedrin. Very good. English be one of the 70 languages. And I said in Yiddish, versteht nicht. I said, you don't understand anything in English. What's going to be one of the 70 languages? You're going to have to learn English. So he looked at me and said, that's a good point. It's a good point. I have to learn English. And then he started screaming at me. He's like, what? English? I have to know English? Trade Russian, trade language, this, that. He started going over. He started laughing. He's like, what'd you tell him? So I told him. He started laughing. Right? He started laughing. He's like, what? English gonna be one of the 70 languages? Right? So obviously he didn't believe that. Even if this, whatever, it's no longer in this world, but if the Sanhedrin would be established, it would be on the Sanhedrin. It's supposed to know 70 languages. Yeah, so he's going to know that language. So you see, English is not a top language, right? Certainly not according to him, and certainly not according to others as well. It's a similar story. With Diane Fisher, blessed memory, of Yaakov Yisrael Fisher, blessed memory. Yaakov Yisrael, I think, yeah. Or Yisrael Yaakov, whatever. Basically, he was one of the Torah giants of the last generation. Yisrael Yaakov Fisher, sorry. Yisrael Yaakov, yeah. Anyway, Diane Fisher happened to be one of the Torah giants of the last generation. And I had an open door policy to go see him. So I got to see him, basically, go through his back door whenever I needed something. I mean, certainly wasn't as close to him, as I was my Rebbe, but any case, he was a big expert in medical things. So people all over the world would ask him different medical questions. So something came in, it's like, oh, it's a good thing you're here. He said, you understand English? He said, yeah, tell me what this says. There's like a whole printout of whatever, different numbers and different things. And so I said, the numbers? Like, no, I understand the numbers. It's like, tell me what this means and what this means. It's a printout in English. So finally, whatever, I explained to him and he understood. So I asked him that, I said, I got a great idea. I said, if, the Rav could teach me, Yiddish, brush up on my Yiddish, that would be good. And I said, no, I'll teach you English. So I'll give you a class in English. We'll reciprocate, right? You teach me Yiddish, I'll teach you English. So So he was one also like just very, very sharp, never one to mince words. It's kind of kind of amazing I had such a connection to, whatever, bona fide Torah giant according to everybody. I mean, he was knew everything about everything. And so he's like, what? He's, he's like, Yiddish? You want to learn Yiddish? I can find you 20 people to learn Yiddish. He's like, oh, that's not a problem. He goes, English? I need to learn English? Like, what are you crazy? I need to know English? Yeah, meanwhile, you see like the veins popping out of his head and whatever. So one of one of the people that helped him, that they actually how I developed my connection to was like, oh, don't worry, they're both very happy. Meanwhile, I see like his veins like popping out of his head. I was like, oh, it's a good thing he doesn't hate me. It's like get him all worked up. But anyway, he said the same thing. He said this, he basically said the same thing that when it comes to English or any of these other any of these other languages, yeah, outside of Hebrew, olashon, hakodesh, and in Yiddish, they're all treif, right? They're basically all they're all non-kosher languages. But you got to speak it, you got to speak it, right? That's the bottom line. He would probably say if you would ask him, it's better to speak in Yiddish, or olashon kodesh, and instead of English or instead of German or French, he'd say, yeah. Now, would he say, you don't have to know the other language? Probably. Probably would also say that, but if you live there, probably have to know the language, right? It's probably better. Probably better, to know the language, right? At least to get around, unless, you get someone else to do all your, if you have to go to, the bank or do other things, right? You have to get help from somebody. You have to get help from someone, um, to do it. But make no mistake, they understood Hebrew, right? When I used to speak, to Diane Fisher, who has a memory, I spoke to him in Hebrew, right? Yeah, I couldn't speak to him in Yiddish. My Yiddish wasn't that good, right? I thought it wasn't that good, but still, he understood Hebrew. If people came to ask him questions, they were Israeli, they didn't understand Yiddish. There's no other common language, so like, he had to speak in Hebrew, right? Now, did he minimize? So this I can't answer. This I don't know. Yeah, did he minimize his answers because he didn't want to go into detail about, and speaking that language? That I don't know. But Diane Fisher was like very quick also. In other words, you'd ask a question, in the middle of the question, he already had an answer. He already knew where the question was going. It's like, no, yes, this, that. Yeah. I had somebody went in to see him. I'll just tell one story. One story, it's a pretty amazing story. Um, that whatever, a friend of mine was having all kinds of issues in his house, different things going on, and things really above nature. So I went to take him. We walked in the door. He didn't even speak to him. Did not even speak to him and looked at him and screamed out, go check your mezuzahs. You need to check your mezuzahs. I didn't even sit there for a minute. I wasn't even sitting down. I didn't even introduce him. Did not even introduce him. He saw him from afar. Just read it on his face. I have no idea. And he said, you got to go check your mezuzahs. We told him the story. I told him the story afterwards. Yeah. Different things going on in his house. He said, I already gave you an answer. He's like, what are you wasting my time? Go check your mezuzahs. How do you know? How in the world did he know? He started screaming the second we walked in the door. See, I have that effect on people. Either they love me or you just walk in the door, they start screaming. Yeah. But how do you know that? Now I'll tell you the story. I'll tell you the end of the story. The end of the story was that there was a neighbor of this friend of mine in the same building. Who was a scribe, who was a sofer. And he recently had just checked the mezuzahs on the doors. He had just recently checked all these mezuzahs. Yeah. Come to find out, come to check his mezuzah, and it's puzzle. It's no good. But he just recently checked. So how do you know? He said, check your mezuzahs. Now, this friend of mine told me afterwards, he's like, I just had them recently checked. I said, listen, this is what the Rav said. He said to go check them. Okay. You know something that we don't know. He screamed at him the second he walks in the door. So I said, listen, if he's already telling you check them, it says check them. Check them. He said, but I just had to, my neighbor just checked them. I said, check them. That's what he said, check them. What do I know? Check them. Sure enough, his mezuzah was possible. It was possible. It was no good. So what happened when he checked it before? I don't know. Don't have an answer. Right? Yeah, a few things amazing about the story. Main thing is that he was able to read it before he even when he walked in the door. And he wasn't a person of, it wasn't a person of many words either. You asked him something, he gave an answer. That was it. He's like, next. Like, get the Royce, get out, next. Yeah, he's busy learning. Very good. People who come in ask questions. He wouldn't sit there like, go through all the intricacies and this and that. Yes, no, this, that. That's it. Move on. Move on. So the miracle by me, when I was first introduced to him, I went on a Saturday night after Shabbos, I went to see him. I was there for 45 minutes. Not like get in and get out, this, that. Wanted me to help him with something. Okay, whatever. I was there for 45 minutes. So I asked my wife, you think he's going to throw us out yet? I was like, how long do you think we're going to be here? Whatever. Ask me different things, this, that. I mean, very hard. Just to say, I'll take questions in a second. You're talking about something, you're talking about people like absolute geniuses in Torah, and like, little old me, can like strike up a conversation, speak them a learning a little bit, some other things. Because he once asked me, right? Time Fisher once asked me, bless his memory, he once asked me, he goes, oh, what are you learning? I told him whatever certain tracks I was learning. He's like, no, what do you have to say? Do you have any interesting to say on the, on the tractates? I said, yeah, I was going like this, I thought like this, or whatever. He nailed me. He just totally nailed me. He's like, oh, you think that's a question? You think that's a question? Answer like this, answer like that, bring from here, bring from. I was like, you asked me what I was learning. I was like, what? I came here to get destroyed, to get demolished, whatever. Like you're talking different, different mental capacity, like altogether. Like you can't imagine. I mean, I saw it with my own eyes. I can't imagine. Can't imagine the depth and level of knowledge. Right? I'll tell one other story. This is a good story also. I'll tell another story. I had a student when I had my learning center that his wife was expecting, and the baby was breech. So he's got a certain thing, Diane Fisher bless the memory, that he tells people to do in order to flip the baby. Right? It's dangerous if the baby's breech. Yeah, baby could get strangled by the umbilical cord. Yeah, so he's got a certain thing. You have to go to a certain spring, and you have to take the water. You have to give it to your wife. Whatever. It's a whole thing. Like it's a whole thing to do, but it's not that complicated. Not that complicated. So he said, okay, this is what you have to do. Right? You go to the spring, you take the water, give it to the wife, she gives it to you, blah blah blah. Whatever. This is what you have to do. And he said the baby will flip. He said the baby will flip. Said okay. Goes to the spring, takes the water, gives it to his wife, gives it back to him, this, that. Didn't work. Doesn't work. He goes back to him. Diane Fisher screams at him and goes, you didn't do it right. So I'm telling you, you didn't do it right. Go back. This is the way you have to do it. Right? Gave him explicit instructions. Go back, do this, do that, and that was it. He did it a second time. Also didn't work. Now I was embarrassed to come back. He goes back a third time. Yeah, he goes back a third time. As he walks in the door, he says, you didn't do it right. I told you. This is what you have to do. Right? This is something that works. It's been proven. You must have done something wrong. That's it. He threw him out. He told him how to do it. He gave instructions again. Now, the next time he did it, his wife felt baby change. And then, a few days later or a week later, whatever it was, she gave birth to a boy. She had a baby boy. So we went back to him. So a student of mine went back to Diane Fisher, and he said, "I got good news." He said, "Mazel tov, my wife had a baby boy." So Diane Fisher said, "Oh, Mazel tov, brought him some cake, whatever." And he said, "I want to tell you something. Anything that's been proven by what the rabbis have said, yeah, doesn't mean it's outdated, doesn't mean this. If it's been proven and it works, then you must have done something wrong." This is an unbelievable fundamental principle. That's why I tell the story. Why? Because he's telling you, just like the air you breathe, even if you can't see it, everybody knows it's there. Whether it's good quality, bad quality, irrelevant. Everybody knows it's there. Yeah, just like there's air in your breathing, so too this will work. Why didn't it work? You're gonna say, "Oh, it's outdated." No, it's proven that it works. Yeah, it's proven throughout the centuries, throughout the millennium, it works. And what happened? You must have done something wrong. Because in spiritual terms, if you have something that works and it's been proven, hundreds of years, thousands of years, it doesn't go bad. It doesn't outdate. Now, there are things that the Gemara says, like if you have certain ailments or certain things, you take this, you take that, you take the other thing. Now, some say the medicinal principles or properties, let's say better, properties of some of these things, they don't have the same power as it does today, right? That it did then, right? That's what some say. Some say that doesn't work today, right? Why won't it work today? It won't work today because it doesn't have the same properties. Properties have changed. Others say no. Others say it worked then and it worked now. Yeah, so you can argue with medicine whether it shouldn't work, doesn't matter. But this was something that was proven throughout the millennium that works. If you have a baby that's breech, this is what you do. This is what you do. So Diane Fisher said to him, if this is something proven in spiritual terms, then it's obvious, that's why I screamed at you, it's obvious that you did something wrong. You had to have done something wrong. Because this is no different than if I have a piece of cheese and I make a shackle, it's right in front of my face, it's there, right? As long as it hasn't, gone bad. It's there, just like you see it, it's right in front of you. Yeah? So that's something, okay, you have right here. There's no different. This is no different. If this works and it's supposed to work, then you did something wrong. But he didn't know what he did the third time any different. That's the whole thing. He didn't really change what he did, right? He listened, he did. He wasn't expecting any great things here. But his wife felt the baby change. That's what he knew. He must have done it right. But Diane Fisher said it's impossible that you didn't, that at that point you didn't do it right. Because this is something that works. This is something spiritual. You can say abracadabra, you can say whatever you want. This is something spiritual. It works. So if it works, you must have done something wrong. Right? That's what he said. That is that story. All right, let me take some questions here. 1 second. 1 second. Someone asked, is it a mixture of German and Hebrew? I don't know if it's a mixture. I don't know if German comes in. I don't know. It's a much purer language either way. Either way, it's a better language. Yeah. Yeah. Is it really mixed? That I don't know. That I don't know. They get it. I'm not sure. It's similar. It's definitely similar. People will say, just like you mentioned, people will say that if you understand German, then you understand Yiddish. Yeah, they're similar. Okay, they are similar. Yeah, not everything you understand, but probably a number of things are similar enough. But it is considered still a holier nation, a holier language, than German or anything else, even if it's similar. It's Yiddish more holy than modern Hebrew, yeah. Definitely people say that. That's why they won't speak modern Hebrew. That's exactly because they're using modern Hebrew for for different things also, which they shouldn't. They wanted to bring it back, but that's not the biblical Hebrew. That's the problem. They bastardizes the language. Yeah, so it's not pure Hebrew. If you tell me it's pure Hebrew, it's one thing. It's not. Because they mixed in other things. They mixed in other modern things. The modern things don't belong there. If you didn't have modern things in there, then Hasidim would speak it. But they don't. Because they have a lot of other things, a lot of negative things that are mixed in. Even though that was a big thing by the early Zionists, by the secular Zionists. They wanted to revamp the Hebrew language, okay. But the Hebrew language they wanted to revamp was not the Holy Tongue we're talking about. They put all kinds of things. I mean, I'm not going to mention all the different, they have a lot of, English things also that got mixed into modern Hebrew also. Yeah, different things. So it's not a pure language. It's not a totally pure language. Yeah, olashon hakodesh is obviously pure. But again, what's better? What's better over here? Yeah, speak modern Hebrew with all its bastardization, right? Or speak Yiddish. So people will say speak Yiddish. I can tell them it's similar to German, even if it is. Even if it is. It's on a higher level than modern Hebrew. Yeah, people would speak that before modern Hebrew. Even if it's similar to German. Even if it's similar. Right? Someone mentioned you would think it's closer to biblical Hebrew. Even if it is, it's still not the same. Still totally not the same. Biblical Hebrew doesn't have curses in it. It doesn't have curse words in it. Modern Hebrew does. Yeah, it's close. Okay, it's similar. Some would say because of the holiness of the language, even a newspaper you can't read in the bathroom. A Hebrew newspaper. Some would say, I'm not saying everybody. Some would say it's better, you shouldn't bring it in the bathroom. Why? Because of the holiness of the letters. Even if there's lashon hara spoken in the newspaper, let's say. I'm not saying you should read a secular Israeli newspaper, but there are those that hold it does have holiness. That the letters themselves have holiness. So even if it's closer, Yiddish is better. They would say Yiddish is better. That's what I would say on that. Let me see some other questions here. Someone here says, very good. Very good, right? Just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? 100%. Yeah. And that's the problem. That is exactly the problem with with Hebrew. That even if it doesn't have any curses in it, right? Which is a good thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, it's a good thing. It's a very good thing. The only problem is I could use the language to speak olashon hara. That's bad. They can say even the holiest of language you could do that, right? That's the point. Not that you should, but that is exactly the point. Someone asked, it's true the King David is the only one in Jewish history to be king, prophet, and perform duties of a priest. Let's see. The king he was. Now, as a as the prophets, right? We would agree, right? We would definitely that would be true, right? Certainly as a prophet, and perform the duties of the priest. So now that is the question. That is the question. So if that is the case, then is there anyone else? Is there anyone else that was a king of prophets? Moshe Rabbeinu was really considered the first king. He was also a prophet, but He didn't do all things in the priesthood. All right, the high priest is given over to Aaron and his kids in the priesthood, right? So he didn't. So it could be. I'm trying to think anyone else in history. I don't know, I have to look into it more, but you might be right. You might be the only one. But that I'm not 100% sure, but King David for sure has all three. Definitely has all three. Anyone else? Good question. I don't know if there's anyone else. Um, even by someone Aaron a Cohen. Okay, but it wasn't king. It wasn't considered king. Somebody asks, why do I think all languages have curses? Because God gave the ability for people, to want to say things, right? The Torah itself, right? The Torah itself tells me that you're not allowed to curse, right? What does it mean? What does it mean that you're not allowed to curse? Right? You're not allowed to curse using God's name. Yeah? You're not allowed to curse in general. 100%, you're not allowed to curse in general. Now, even though you're not allowed to curse, so then what does the Torah tell me? The Torah tells me that's not something you should do. Good? It's not something I should do, right? Or anybody should do. Now, if it's not something you should do, why did the Torah put it in there? Right? Torah warns us against all kinds of things. Right? What to eat, how to speak, right? Or what not to say in general, right? There are a number of things. There are a number of things the Torah warns against. Some I would say are pretty obvious, but the Torah tells me anyway. Right? Torah doesn't, definitely tells me anyway, but the Torah is going to tell me because Torah has something to add. It's not just telling you an obvious thing. Like, for example, in the Ten Commandments, it says don't steal. But I have many other commands before you get to the Ten Commandments not to steal. So what's the novelty in the Ten Commandments not to steal? So you tell me emphasis. It's coming to tell you that it's so severe, it goes in the Ten Commandments. Very good. It goes in the Ten Commandments. Okay. But what do all the commentaries tell me? All the commentaries tell me when it says don't steal, it cannot mean don't take, Reuven should not take something that belongs to Shimon without permission or steal money or whatever, right? So you tell me that's what it means. But if I have 2, 3, 5 other times it tells me don't steal and what the context is of not that Reuven can't take from Shimon, then what's it doing in Ten Commandments? So you tell me one possible reason could be you want to say it's so severe, you mention it again. Right? Sometimes maybe things, will be said over again in order that you get the point. It's a very severe thing. But usually something is mentioned more than once to teach you something that wasn't taught before. Yeah. In other words, you can have commands. You can have commands that were given, that were already given after the Torah was given. And then the Torah mentions it again. So now you can ask the question, what's it doing here? Why is the Torah mentioning it? So you can say emphasis. Yeah, you could say that. But usually the Torah doesn't mince words. In other words, if the Torah itself is going to say something, and it's going to say it more than once, it has to be adding something. Right? It can't just, you're not just saying it for no reason. Right? Give one example. The Torah says in 3 different places, you're not allowed to cook a calf in its mother's milk. 3 times. It tells me in 3 different places. Now, if you're a Karaite who doesn't believe in oral tradition and doesn't believe in what the rabbis say, they're going to look at it literally. What are they going to answer? They're going to have to come up with an answer why it mentions it 3 times. Now, we understand why it's mentioned 3 times. Yeah, it's mentioned 3 times. The rabbis tell us because you're not allowed to cook it even if you don't eat it. You're not allowed to eat it. You're not allowed to get benefit from it. That's what we learn. That's why it's mentioned 3 times. If I don't have that explanation, I have to come up with another explanation. Yeah, if we're going to take the Torah literally like they do, like the Karaites do, there's no rabbinic interpretation, then how are they going to learn it? How are their quote unquote rabbis going to learn it? They got a problem. It says 3 times. Tell me once. I'm not, I'm thick in the head. I'm not that thick. I got it. Don't cook a calf in its mother's milk. Okay? I get it. Yeah. Now you could ask, what exactly does that mean? That's a different issue, right? What it means, but if you told me once, I understood. I understood what's going on. If you told me once. I understand. I can't cook milk and meat together. Okay. Or I can't, I don't know, maybe I can't have milk and meat together. It says cook. Let's say better. Yeah? The Torah says you can't cook. You can't cook it together. Very good. So why do you have to tell me a second time? Yeah, because Kaufman's thick 2,000 years later? Maybe. Maybe. Why didn't you tell me a third time? Are we all mentally challenged? We didn't get it the first time? So Kara is going to have to come up with an answer. What's their answer going to be? Emphasis. Torah doesn't mince any words. You can't give that answer. You got to come up with an answer. Yeah, some answer anyway. But at the end of the day, right? At the end of the day, language. What are languages for? Right, to communicate. Very good. Right, languages are there to communicate. Now, is everything that a person communicates, that a person's going to say, is it always good? Not necessarily. It could be something negative. A person's building their sukkah, they take a hammer, right hand, hammer, right hand, left thumb, bam. Yeah. They smash their thumb. Are they going to say, wow, this is beautiful. I feel so great today? No, what are they thinking? They're in pain. They're going to scream out in pain. Well, they're not just going to scream out in pain. What would some people, probably a lot of people, throw everybody under the bus? Yeah. Well, what would a lot of people do? They'll curse. 100%, whatever language, doesn't matter. They'll curse. Because they're in pain. They don't just say ouch. Not usually. They say ouch with a whole bunch of other things added to it. Right? So I tell people, a person wants to work, on cursing. So they just take on 20 minutes a day, half an hour a day. Yeah. Whatever it is, that time period. Whatever you do, you're not going to curse. So over time, you'll see you have more of an awareness about cursing. You hear other people cursing. Oh, I can't believe people speak like that. This and that. You get an awareness. So let's say you've been working on this for a while. Yeah. You've been working on this for a while. What happens? You have a higher awareness now that when you hear people curse, you're like disgusted by it. Now, you were the same way shortly before, but okay, you have a higher awareness now. So now imagine, months later, you've been working on this. You haven't cursed, you probably haven't thought about cursing, this and that. Very good. Maybe you heard some people curse, okay, but you haven't done it. You're pretty much in control. And then this happens. Right? Right hammer, left thumb, bam. You just crushed your thumb. I'm not saying, I'm not saying you dislocated it, I'm not saying you broke it, whatever. You're in pain. You're in pain. So now you remember, I can't curse. So you scream out. You scream out, but you don't curse. That's huge. Most people, that's the first thing they would do. Nothing to talk about. That's the first thing they would do. Right? So then I would ask the next question. The fact that you didn't curse, you get a lot of merit. Tremendous amount of merit for not cursing. Yeah? Now let me ask you the $2 million question. And the $2 million question is, did you think about cursing? Did you think about the curse word or not in your mind? And what would the person say? Rabbi, I'm not an angel. I'm not an angel. I didn't curse. Very good. That's huge. That 100%, go have a piece of cake, chocolate, whatever. You deserve a break. You deserve a break for that. That's huge. Most people would curse straight away. Straight away. Yeah? But did you think the curse word? Did you think it? And what's the person going to say? Okay, I thought it. I thought a lot of them in many different languages. Okay, that's another level. That's another level. So someone would say, is it really possible to get to that point where you're not even going to think about the curse word? So it's another level, a much higher level. Yeah. You deal with the pain in a totally different way. Yeah. How many people holding by it? I didn't take a survey, but it's a high level. The person's not even going to think the word, even though they're part of them, even though they've already heard them. They've probably said them also, at some point. So very good. So it's part of them, but they don't say it. That's huge. That's not a small thing. Most people curse. I don't think it's kind of funny. Younger people understand. People say what they want, they don't care, whatever. You think someone like in their 80s, and something happens and they curse. Like, it's kind of funny in a certain way. You can say, what's the difference? They're just older. They're just much older. Okay. Why are people refined? That's the answer, right? That is exactly the answer. The question is, why do people think, or why do I think all languages have curse words? Because that's the way people speak. That's the norm. I'm not saying it's right, but that's the norm. That's the way they speak. Some more, some less. Anybody doesn't curse? Find it hard to believe. Anybody in the world doesn't curse. Ever. In the secular world. Jew or non-Jew. No, I'm saying they never cursed. And then you ask, okay, what type of curse words? Okay, we're not going there, but somebody not to curse, not to curse. I understand the person on TV giving over the news, other things. You got to be careful what you say. Very good, right? You can't curse on, you can't curse. They're good. Sometimes, a person will hear an interview with let's say an athlete or somebody, and they have to bleep them out, F-bombs, what they call. Yeah, they're gonna bleep them out. Because you can't have that on TV. Very good. Nobody, you get somebody doesn't curse at all. Hard to imagine. So you ask me, why do I think? Because it's part of everyday language. Yeah. All languages have it's an everyday language. Right? If it's everyday language, right? If it's everyday language, then why would I think not that way? That's the norm. That 100% is the norm. It's the way people speak. Yeah. I'm not saying they say it every last thing. Every conversation they say it. I'm not going that far. But I'm saying it's common. It's very common, right? So my opinion would be, for what it's worth, why do all languages have it? Because that's the way people speak. That's the norm, why people speak. I'm not saying all the time, but they put it in the language because that's how people speak. Is Yiddish more holy than ancient Hebrew? No. Ancient Hebrew, if we're talking olashon hakodesh, that's what I meant, right? That's holier than Yiddish. That is definitely holier than Yiddish. Yeah, but then Yiddish is a close second, but it's certainly holier, I think, than certainly modern Hebrew. Will the Messiah? Somebody asks, will the Messiah be king, prophet, and perform duties of the priest? The Messiah, seemingly, will be from the house. Will be from. It's going to come from the tribe of David, right? Is he gonna perform in the temple? I don't know. I don't know if he's gonna do that. His obligation is to build it or be on the top of building it. Yeah. And bringing in the exiles and all that. And he's going to be a leader, 100%. He's going to be a leader. Is he going to be the king of the Jewish people? Probably. Right? It'll be the leader. I don't know if it'll be, it'll be the king per se. I mean, probably. I would assume everyone's gonna, it'll be in charge. So I would assume. Prophet, yeah. Yeah, certainly. Performing duties of the priest, that I don't know. I don't know if he's going to be doing that. I mean, you see, King David did it. right? You see, King David did it. Could he do it? It could be, but he's got to be from the tribe of. He's got to be from the tribe of Yehuda. Yeah, yeah. He's got to. He's got to. He's got to have the Davidic line, right? He can do things in the temple, right? But if he's not a Cohen or a Levite, certain things he can't do, right? So yeah, it's a good question. So that I would think not. I would think he'll do other things, but not that. But not serve as a priest or whatever. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. So no other questions. I'm going to sign out. Anyone has any questions? Find me on Facebook at Machaim Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, orthodoxconversion.com, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There you get videos, Q&As, ethics of our fathers, Book of Leviticus. You want to send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RBBICHAMCOFFMA